We have government leaders that are planning to fire tens of thousands of workers. And as the plan is coming together, they're required to sign an NDA. So legally, they're forced to keep quiet. They can't tell their own people what's happening, why it's happening. Will it impact you? Let's get into it. The Department of Veteran Affairs, or VA, wants to fire 80,000 people at a minimum. Realistically, it's probably going to be a lot higher than that. So they're holding meetings right now. Senior leaders are holding meetings at the VA. These are individuals that are SES, these are executives, GS-15s, and in some cases, GS-14s. And they're being required to sign the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement. This is exceptionally rare in the government. Now, these meetings, they're coming together because they're trying to figure out who stays, who goes, what happens to this office or that office. The plan is coming together. An NDA is a legal contract that says you can't talk about this. You see them all the time in the private sector for stuff like protecting trade secrets, keeping new products under wraps, or sealing high-profile legal settlements. But in the government, you just don't see it, unless it's classified national security stuff, or maybe some unique procurement type deal. Maybe you might see it there, but not when you're giving employees the boot. So why is the VA doing this? Is it to silence their employees or hide something messy? In a recorded VA meeting, you have about 200 people there asking questions. The leader says, I know the answer to your question, but I can't tell you because I'm binded by the NDA. So obviously this is going to make you a little concerned and worried. You have questions about your office. How deep are the cuts? The reduction in force cuts? Is your job in jeopardy? You need to get mentally prepared. You need to start looking at your alternatives and come up with an action plan. But your leader's not giving you anything to go off of. For example, people want to know how many people signed up for the deferred resignation program. Was it 1,000? Was it 10,000? The reason that they want to know is there's a belief that if enough people volunteer to resign, the impact of the reduction in force will be less. So they would like to get updated on that number. Nobody's really updating the number. You might hear something come out initially like, yeah, we know on the first deferred resignation, there were 77,000 people that raised their hand to get out of there, but we don't really know the exact number. You can kind of piece it together from DOD and some of the other agencies that have been reporting, but we don't have an up-to-date status. And we really don't know if that has any correlation with how deep the cuts will be in the summer. A senior federal HR official said that these agreements are strange, technically unnecessary, and redundant. Why? It's because most federal employees are not supposed to be sharing information to the public anyway. If you look at the standards of ethical conduct, they're not supposed to share internal agency plans, leaked draft documents or sensitive discussions, or release non-public data to unauthorized people. But this has still been happening all over the federal government. The most recent one was the State Department, where you had a draft executive order leak, and there was a lot of information in there. So this NDA, it might be to reinforce the fact that you're not supposed to do it. But you know that people are going to continue to do it. This might be an effort to further frighten people from sharing information with the media. This HR official thinks that the VA might be using NDAs to silence employees after they're laid off. So let's say you lose your job, you're a little angry with the circumstances in which you lost your job, and the media wants to hear about it. You want to talk to the media. Well, this NDA, well, potentially it could stop you from doing that. Now, we've already heard dozens of stories, especially in the VA. You had veterans who were fired for poor performance. You do a little digging, surface level digging, and you find out, well, wait a minute, they actually had high levels of performance. Well, stories like that doesn't look good. You don't want stories like that to get out. That would look bad on the VA. Let's compare this to something else. In 2018, there was a private company, Terranos, used NDAs to keep employees quiet about its shady practices. Those NDAs stopped whistleblowers from exposing fraud for years. Now, I'm not saying that the VA is engaged in shady practices, But what I am saying is when the NDAs start coming out, and typically they wouldn't be, well, that's a great time to start asking some questions. So here's what we know about the timeline. We got the VA reorganization cell. They're holding meetings right now. They're going to review suggestions in May, and then they're going to release their plan in June. But the layoffs are not going to start until September. And this kind of goes counter to what we've been hearing recently. We've been hearing a lot that the RIFs were going into effect during the summer months. But some agencies have already started their RIFs. It looks like the VA is going to have to wait until fall before they kick theirs off. And the reason why they might discourage leadership from talking about it is because things can change so much between now and the fall. So if leadership says, yeah, we're going to go ahead and cut 80,000, but the real number ends up being 95,000, and one office you thought was safe is no longer safe, well, that would send a lot of conflicting messages before the VA actually agreed on what's happening. So that could be a reason. Representative Mark Takano is not happy. He says these NDAs might illegally block whistleblower protections, laws that let employees report waste, fraud, or abuse without fear of retaliation. He's calling out the VA secretary for dodging Congress's questions and doubling down on secrecy. But it's not just the Democrats. Both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, they want to make sure that these cuts do not hurt veterans. So what happened a couple of years ago was the PACT Act unrolled. PACT Act expands health care to 1 million plus veterans that previously didn't have health care. So as you're whittling away the number of the VA's workforce, is it going to have negative repercussions on the veteran population? Nobody wants to be the politician who denies health care to a veteran. Whistleblower protections are a big deal. Federal employees have the right to report mismanagement or illegal layoffs. So an NDA wouldn't hold up in court if it was to silence an employee from speaking out against those two categories. So right now, members of Congress, they're encouraging VA employees to be vocal, to come forward if there's anything illegal happening within that agency. Let's look at a 2014 whistleblower case that exposed massive wait times at VA hospitals. This is where veterans were waiting months for care. Those whistleblowers helped spark major reforms. But if they would have been forced to sign NDAs, we might never have known. That's why it matters. One employee said that senior leaders hated to sign those NDAs, but they did it to avoid chaos. They said these are really good, talented, and caring leaders being thrown in the middle of this scuffle, doing their best to protect us. Now let's talk about one specific cut that has a lot of people talking. The VA has call centers all across the country and within its regions. They are proposing to cut those call centers to just two. One that handles appointments when you want to schedule an appointment. The other one that handles billing and pharmacy. So the reason for this, obviously, is to save money. Why are we trying to save money? Well, the number one reason is so we can pass those tax cuts. So we can do those tax cuts all across the country. But if you're impacting wait times, that could mean that less veterans actually receive care. So we'll have to see, how does having two call centers impact service and wait times? Now, I'm not saying that the VA shouldn't reorganize. I've actually worked there in Washington, D.C., and it has grown a lot, especially since 2019. It has grown. But what I am saying that is when you force people to sign NDAs, you're not being transparent. You're not building an agency that's filled with trust, right? How do you get trust? The number one way to get trust is you have to be transparent. Even if it's messy, you have to show people behind the curtain. Speaking of the VA, they launched a new task force aimed at investigating anti-Christian discrimination within its workforce. This one strikes me a little odd. If you combine my military time with my time as a civil servant, I've been in the system for over 26 years. So I've interacted with thousands of people during that duration of time. I've never encountered anti-Christianity bias. I've never even seen it. I've never even heard of it. And for a task force like this to be launched, you would think maybe Department of Justice, probably EEOC, probably the Department of Labor. You wouldn't think it's coming from the VA. That's not the VA's mission. It's healthcare benefits towards veterans. It's not necessarily, something revolving religion. So it must be a serious problem over there for them to spend the energy, the effort, and the time to set up a task force to address this issue. If all that wasn't enough, we also have AI coming for federal jobs. So you might have been wondering, how are these agencies going to chop a third of their workforce or a half of their workforce in some situations? Well, they're going to leverage AI. We have AI bots in multiple federal agencies that have already been revealed. If you want to know more about that, check this video out next. Stay updated by signing up to the free newsletter down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.